There is nothing more sobering than looking at something similar from a distance and realize how messed up it is. This is not really about equality. That would give people ideas. And that's the last thing the Chinese Communist Party wants.
China had reached its pre-industrial limits to growth. Its population kept on going up and up, but its agricultural productivity just could not feed people. And so people are trying to farm really marginal lands. Either they're too vertical, or they don't have reliable rainfall, and you're getting massive soil erosion doing these things, and you're also getting a lot of famines. And famines are both the cause and the effect of civil wars. In this map, you can just see I've named some of the big rebellions on this one. It's to give you a sense that these rebellions affect all of China, not just a little here and there, but a lot of everywhere. And I'm going to give you a table, and this is a simplified table. It only goes 1845 to 1895. It's part of a much bigger table that would cover the entire 19th century. And that table is an oversimplification. So the point is, this is not business as usual. In the red box, that is the height of these rebellions, 1851 to 1878. The biggest rebellion in there is the Taiping's. It's estimated that 20 million people died in the Taiping Rebellion. To put that figure in perspective, and people don't know how many people died in all these things. China didn't know how many people they had, much less how many people they lost. But to give you a sense of it, in World War II, it's estimated that 55 million people died. So you're talking 20 million just in the Taipings, and I have no idea how all this adds up. But it's huge. The Chinese like to talk about these as being rebellions or uprisings. Give me a break. They're civil wars. A whole bunch of them want to overthrow the dynasty in Beijing. A whole other set of them want to secede from the empire, often these minority people who just want the Han, the predominant people, to go away.
I'm actually really surprised because this is apparently a huge deal in our history. While I'm familiar with the subject, Taiping Tianguo. You can't go through Chinese education without hearing about what happened. But this is a subject that I think, again, is not fully explained, not factually explained to us as students. And of course, if you've watched some of my other videos, you'd know that in a lot of authoritarian regimes, and China particularly, uses history as a weapon to serve a purpose, right? To persuade its people of the legitimacy of the ruling party, and that is the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the first thing that jumped out at me is I wasn't aware how many people died. So here's what I was taught. The failure of the mighty Taiping Rebellion after 14 years of fierce struggle dealt a heavy blow to the Qing dynasty and foreign capitalist forces. So you can clearly see here, like Professor Paine said, this was framed as a rebellion, and it was very much applauded. It was considered this grassroots movement that was supposed to overthrow the dynasty. That is in line with what the Chinese Communist Party kind of did, because when they came into power, they rallied support from farmers and the kind of lower class people as well. The ideological foundation of both movements, they borrowed something from the West. And in this case, this is a religion. And for the Chinese Communist Party, it is also a foreign concept, communism, right? And they both used these theories as a pretext for their own agenda. They used the conflicts between different classes, between the rich and the poor. They dangle that precious equality in front of their supporters, except it has nothing to do with equality. And I mean, history has shown that to us. Within the ruling party, there's strict hierarchy. I like how she not only knows exactly what happened, but also knows the Chinese narrative and how that's different from what actually happened. When people talk about sensitive topics, taboo topics in China, people often think about the Tiananmen Square massacre. They think about the Cultural Revolution, and we've covered that a little bit in my previous videos. But one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is the censorship carried out by the Chinese Communist Party is actually very sophisticated. There is nothing more sobering than looking at something similar from a distance and realize how messed up it is. It's like, if something horrible happened to you and you have a friend try to give you some advice and you're like, okay, what if this happened to another person? We hear that a lot. Sometimes it's hard for you to recognize something when you're in the midst of it. But once you put some distance between you and the event, you tend to look at it clearer. And I think that's what the Chinese Communist Party here is fearing. And in this case, if we were able to look at something that's very much similar to the Chinese Communist Party, and then think, wait a minute, this is wrong, this is hypocritical, this is not really about equality, that would give people ideas. And that's the last thing the Chinese Communist Party wants.
Choose in this era. So some of these provinces are devastated for generations. Okay, so that's point one, these civil wars. Point two is this coincided with an era of accelerating European imperialism, where Europeans and also the Japanese are carving out massive spheres of influence for themselves. So the Chinese are not going to have sovereignty over their country, full sovereignty, for a very, very long time. And the worst part gets even worse. This happens to China because China loses a succession of regional wars. It loses the first Opium War, the second Opium War. The Japanese snagged the Ryukyu Islands. This is a mess. This is not business as usual. This is, think about one country being afflicted by this much trouble. And then it comes at a time when the Manchus are in real trouble themselves. They had ridden to power on these fabulous cavalries and in tremendous operational success for people who are only 2% of the population that they dominate. But here's the problem with their tremendous success in their military campaigns. They're overextending China financially. Inside the round circle there, that's China proper. These are the core provinces of China that produce all the income. But the Manchus came in from Manchuria up there, but they also take Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Tibet. The areas that cost not Manchuria so much, but the other ones, they cost a lot of garrisoning. It costs a lot of money to garrison these places. And so it looks like a great success, but it's going to have problems later on. And then here's what happens to the Manchu emperors. They no longer ride at the head of their armies. The Qianlong emperor, who's considered to be, who ruled at the height of the dynasty, what's he spending his money on? All sorts of interesting architectural programs. And that's why people think he's great, builds beautiful things. And then it gets better. So they got all these tributaries. Some of their tributaries produce really high quality opium. And the emperors decide they want to sample the goods. And the people who are preparing it for them also want to sample the goods. And then the Manchu banner forces that are the Praetorian Guard of the Manchus are also sampling the goods.
I'm assuming what she's talking about here is somewhere around the Opium War. If you ask any Chinese person that was born and grew up in China and went through the whole standard education, like, the majority of Chinese students, if you ask them to name one war in Chinese history, the Opium War is that war. Most people don't really know what exactly happened. If you go on YouTube, if you type in Chinese and you say Opium War, one of the most searched topics is actually the truth behind the Opium War. There is quite a level of curiosity among Chinese diaspora. We would want to know exactly what happened, because growing up, the Opium War is tied with the century of humiliation. It is the century where we were humiliated. This is a shame trigger. If you want to rile up a Chinese person, you just ask them to talk about Opium War. They get really mad. They get really indignant because this was drilled into us when we were young. We were told over and over again by school teachers, the foreigners, the UK, the US, the West, they invaded us and they wanted to poison our mind by selling us this toxic, this extremely dangerous drug, and that is opium. Our whole nation fell for their trap and we were humiliated by them. them because they poisoned us. It's basically the official narrative. This is not really a huge war, and I don't think most Westerners are familiar with this. But this was used as a tactic, as a story, that was told to us to have this hatred against you. Except that it's not true. A lot of people didn't know that we produced opium. It was not as good. Like the professor said, we were in an economic downfall. And during this time, opium was not the whole drug culture. It's not illegal to sell drugs. It was a completely different time. It's a weird feeling to look at somebody who was not subject to that brainwashing, who was very well spoken, well versed on the subject, and completely just almost lighten up the subject a little bit and just tell it as it is. It's an odd feeling for me.
Russia is the catalyst. It's taking advantage of the collapse of China, and it's going to catalyze things in a way that Japan is going to leverage. Russia has always tries to expand its territory. It is today the largest country on the planet. Why they need more territory, nobody knows. But that's what they're after. And in these days, what they're taking are those two large areas. And by the time the Bolsheviks finish working their magic, Russians have taken from the Chinese sphere of influences. The Bolsheviks are beyond today, but it gives you a sense. They took more territory from Chinese sphere of influence than the United States east of the Mississippi. It's a lot of territory. But
oh my God, where do I even start? So when we were taught to hate the West, to harbor this deep-rooted hostility against you guys, Russia is not considered the West. And I think this is another fine example of how history is used. You gotta understand, like in an authoritarian regime, history is a weapon. It is not about what values to reflect on, what we could learn from the past. That is nowhere near what the Chinese Communist Party want us to think about. It is about how they cherry pick everything and they want you to, basically be brainwashed, right? The professor is saying how Russia is the catalyst, isn't it? It took so many lands and all that, but we were not taught that. I think the central idea that was hammered into us was kind of like the opposite. There was no emphasis on Russia's invasion or how, they caused all of this and blah, blah, blah. But there was a laser focus on the West, on the British Empire, on the United States, on Japan, all these countries that are democratic now, because that's what they wanted us to focus on. Their logic is that in the past, whoever took the most land from us, we should hate them. Whoever humiliated us, we should hate them. By that logic, we should have hated Russia the most. But we were not exposed to that part of the history. Today, most Chinese people, they don't think anything bad about Russia. So yeah.